GLF's Brave New World welcomes you back to our second session of the day. Those of you who missed our earlier session today, a little bit of Stephen Fry in conversation with Anandita Ghosh, and all our other sessions with George Saunders, Edmund de Waal, Colm Toibin, Chitra Devakurni Banerjee, Peter Frankopan, Margaret Atwood, and so many others. You can watch these on our Facebook page, GLF Litfest, or on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF. Our official radio partner is Red FM, Bajate Raho. Our next session is Bapsi Sidhwa, Between the Silences, in conversation with Urvashi Butalia. Celebrated novelist Bapsi Sidhwa speaks to writer and feminist publisher Urvashi Butalia about her creative journey across cultures, continents, and chronicles, and what she calls a Punjabi, Pakistani, Parsi roots. Bapsi Sidhwa is a Houston-based author. Her novels are Cracking India, Crow Eaters, Pakistani Bride, American Brat, and Water. Two of her books were adapted by Deepa Mehta for the acclaimed films Earth and Water. She has won several awards, including a Bunting Fellowship at Radcliffe, the Leela Wallace Reader's Digest Award, Sitara-e-Imtiaz, and the Primo Mondello, Italy. Urvashi Butalia is a feminist writer and publisher. She co-founded Kali for Women, India's first feminist publishing house, and thereafter, in 2003, she set up Zuban, a feminist publishing house, of which she is now director. Her best-known published work is the award-winning History of Partition, titled The Other Side of Silence, Voices from the Partition of India. She is currently completing a new non-fiction work on the life of a trans woman. Please do remember to comment by typing it in the comment section. And in case any of you have bandwidth issues, you can find us on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF. And of course, if we drop off, just hang in there. We'll be right back. Before we go to the conversation, we're delighted to share with you an excerpt of the biopic Bapsi, The Silences of My Life, which is currently in production and has been directed by Sadia Ukwil.
People are gifted in different ways. Some become marathon runners. Some become great actors. I couldn't act for the life of me. I tried once, but they said you're hopeless at it. But I was somehow gifted as a writer. Your whole being tells you what your passion is.
Bapsi, she's so great.
Bapsi Sidhwa is American.
Books like The Crow Eaters and American Brat just make you laugh out loud. Cracking India can break your heart. Just brilliant. I mean, she told it from the point of view of a young Parsi girl. It's, about the partition of India, which was a terrible moment.
It was the silences in my life that made me want to write. I was a very good listener. Because I didn't talk, I listened a lot. Now I've become a non-stop talker. My polio did not make me weak at any point. Well, I used to climb mountains. We had a house in Nathia Gully, and out there I used to go mountain hiking.
Her writing has always been a part of my life growing up, and eventually I have crept up into some of her stories.
When I started writing, I couldn't stay away from my story. Just get down to it. Write rubbish. If you want to fight with somebody, write that down and use swear words. Do what you want, but release it. I've had a very full life. And as long as I'm alive, I'll be writing.
Thank you, Sadia, for allowing us to screen this wonderful excerpt on Bapsi Sidhwa. Sadia continues to solicit funding to complete this seminal work. And should anyone wish to contribute to the cause, please do visit her website. Ladies and gentlemen, Bapsi Sidhwa, Between the Silences, in conversation with Urvashi Butalia. Over to you.
Bapsi, hello, this is Urvashi.
Hi, Urvashi.
Hi,
How nice
you.
to meet you.
Lovely to see you again after all these years, and you're looking quite stunning as always. So,
Hello, my dear. How about you? You look great.
thank you. Thank you. So, shall we get started, Bapsi?
Certainly.
Okay. So, I actually want to ask you about the film, but I'm going to come to that afterwards. Let me start by asking you to just reflect on your long career as a writer and the many different books that you have written during this time. I remember that it wasn't until your second book, The Crow Eaters, that you said you began to think of yourself as a writer. And that was a book you wrote about your community, the Parsis, and got into a lot of trouble for it. So, would you like to just look back on your career and talk about what's been great, what books you've loved doing, what have been the things you wanted to do but you didn't manage to do, and what are the things you still plan to do?
Well, each book has its own unique flavor and what it brought to. With
The Bride?
with my first novel about my God, what am I forgetting?
It's the tribal girl in Karakoram. That's the one, The Bride.
Mm-hmm. With my first novel, I went to the mountains on my honeymoon, and I came back with all the mountains of the Karakoram in my eyes. The gorgeous river Indus out there, which was just a blue sort of velvety flow, frothing somewhere, falling somewhere, gorgeous. And out there, I heard the story, which we were invited by a major, Saftabat, and he said, one day we saw a little Punjabi girl with an old tribal, and we wondered, what is he doing with her up in this area? So he had them called over and asked him, and he said, I'm taking her across the river into the tribal territory to marry one of my relatives. So Saftabat asked the girl, is that okay? And she seemed content. She smiled shyly. She was happy. And then what he told me was encapsulated. But of course, I had to fill it in with so many details because all he told me, the girl ran away. So I was so captivated by that girl's story, by the river, by the fabulous Karakorams, that I just wanted to sit down and write. And I did write. I had never written before, except, a few essays or something. But here was something, it was a novel. I knew it was a novel as I wrote. And I was an absolute novice. So I used to quickly brush up on the dictionary and, which is that other very important book, I forget. And slowly, I found I wanted it at every time the exact word to express what I felt. Otherwise, I felt it's not worth writing. And that is why I searched the exact word, the thesaurus. I used everything. And as I was using these things, my language automatically began to grow. And somehow my writing started to flow. And it was an obsession with me. I couldn't stay away from it. I wanted to keep on writing. And even when we played bridge, I would run away and write a couple of sentences and be called back. It was not something I could stay away from because it was my life. I was writing my life in a way. And it took, because it was my first book, And I was writing under circumstances that my children were going to school. And when my husband was at work, those were the only times I wrote. Then we would go to long holidays, 3-4 month holidays, my husband would take her out. And I would come back, I would have not forgotten a thing, and I would just take off from where I'd left off. My writing came naturally to me because I was so obsessed by it. And eventually I finished the story as I wanted to. And I cried and cried at the end. Because here was the little girl whose story I'd written, I'd lived with her, I'd gone into her life, she'd become a part of me, and suddenly she is killed. And I couldn't bear that. So in the end, I made her live. Only just about live.
That's a lovely story. And then how did you go on to writing about your community, about the Parsis? And you said that that novel is like the Parsi Pickwick Papers because you were reading Dickens at the time you were writing.
Well, no, Dickens was one of my, I didn't care for Dickens particularly because he could be pretty morbid and sad. But I loved his Pickwick Papers. I mean, as soon as I picked it up, I started laughing. I discovered it among the very first few books. And when I read it, I couldn't stop laughing. And I must have read it at least 5 times. I loved it so much. And when I started writing Crow-Eaters, subconsciously, unconsciously, I thought I may have picked up something from him. And the Crow-Eaters is based on many members of my community. I mean, they're amalgamated characters. It is, of course, a farce. It's not a very true, but there is an element of truth in it. And it again, luckily for me, wrote itself. My books write themselves. And I had great fun writing it. You know, whereas I was sad while writing The Pakistani Bride, I was in a very good mood writing this book because at every sentence, every paragraph, there was something hilarious. And then, of course, there are the very, very tragic bits, which I wish hadn't been there, but they belonged there because I was following a certain truth. It was not totally fictional. It is a lot fictional, but the characters are true and the incidents are true. It is about my father's old wine shop based there, and his sons and children, including me, and then the person who takes over the shop, and the way he's a little stingy fellow, and the way he handles it is so different. And then I go into the relationship of this young man with, he's been brought up so severely. He studied under lamplights, poverty. But he's suddenly done very well. He's a shrewd businessman. He sits in the bathroom with a reed curtain and people come to him and talk to him while he's on the pot. And he does business this way. And one day I heard him say, oh, the war is broken out and I'm going to do a big deal in tin sheet. And he made a lot of money out of that deal. So he did well and he prospered. But he was very, very stingy. I mean, we never had anything except pots, which the jamadars used to come and clear, and horrible little brick sort of floors. And then one day there were men who were polishing away the floor of the bathroom, and we thought, oh my, something very gorgeous is going to come out of it. And all that came out of it was a black cement floor with a little flecks of black and white in it. Very disappointing, because my friends' houses had fabulous bathrooms and fabulous floors. And then there came into our life a lady called Kitty Bharucha, Dr. Bharucha's daughter. And she was very lovely, very sort of, my father was totally, anybody would be totally besotted by her, or be sort of anxious to listen to what she had to say and do what she wanted. And she said, oh, you know, Mr. Bandara, you need to smarten up your home. And she had the walls painted different colors and beautiful furniture brought, and the sitting rooms elaborated. And, you know, she changed the whole demeanor. I don't know if I'm going out of range.
Well, okay, let's move on to your next book. You know, in many ways, Bapsi writers, they write a lot of things, but sometimes it comes to be one piece of work in their lives that dominates the discussion and that they come to be known by more than anything else. And in your life, that's Ice Candy Man, Cracking India, the two different names, the book about partition. And you have said often that it is partly autobiographical, but one of the phrases that you've used about it is what gets picked up in this documentary that's being made about you, where you said that it is, you wrote it out of the silences in your life.
Well, you know, my life, because as a child I had polio, and I never went to school because of, you know, somehow the doctor told my parents when I was very, very 2 years or 3 years old and he performed the operation. And my father asked, what about schooling? He said, what about schooling? She doesn't know to go to school. She won't go to college. She's not going to become a doctor or a professor, is she? Don't send her to school. Don't, it'll be too much for her nerves. Let her stay at home and have a nice, cushy life, you know. And with the result, I was deprived of companionship and education, and my life at home was very solitary. My parents barely talked to me. They had no time for each other. My mother was always running after to appease my father. And we had only servants. I had a younger brother who had a life of his own. He was like Quicksilver, you know, he used to be here and there. And all that was the silences of my life, you know. And out of that, I think it gave me the tenacity to write, or it fed my imagination, because I had nothing, a vacuum. And that vacuum was filled by my thoughts and what I would like to write. And writing was a big relief. And of course, before that, my companions were books. Little Women became part of my family. I identified with them. I cried and cried when, I forget the book, when that lady dies under the train, Victor Hugo's novel. And, you know, I read these books and took them very much to heart, but they taught me a lot. And because I had, even up till the age of 15, nobody really to talk to. My parents never talked. I was very lucky in one regard. I had a lady I've called godmother, who was not related to us, but who was childless, very, very poor, but somehow or the other, and after my little private tuition, I would go to her, and she is the person who nurtured me and gave me the undivided love, which is the right of every child. Without that love, I would not have been able to bloom, because I just, in her presence, I felt safe. I couldn't sort of be with her without clinging to her. She was a large, old woman and very warm. I felt her warmth, and she loved me. So that was great. And the Crow Eaters has a lot of that relationship there because she had a younger sister whom she bullied around, who was devoted to her, but she bullied around. And her relationship with her uh, brother-in-law, and when they go to a fire temple and they make a big ruckus there. These are very hilarious scenes. The book itself is a very funny book.
That's the Crow Eaters. But you were talking also just before that of Ice Candy Man.
Yeah.
And the silences of your life. And I'm just wondering, like, you were 9 years, that book is a story of partition at a time when there wasn't that much in English fiction about partition and about the complexities of what happened on both sides. And you were 9 when partition happened. But
when it started in Lahore, I was younger because my young days were filled with the chants of the mobs. The Hindus were still there, the Sikhs were still in the Punjab, and all the time we would hear the chanting of Hare Hare Mahadev and Sat Sri Akal and Allahu Akbar. And all these chants of mobs were, even as a child, I knew they were terrifying to my eyes. And they were up to no good. They were killing each other, which was, the servants would bring the news, aaj itne qatl hue, aaj yahan ye hua, aaj wahan aag laga. Then one day I went to visit some friends in Muzang Chungi. And suddenly the house in front of us was put onto fire and was burning away. And to children, of course, this was a tamasha, to watch another house burning. But afterwards, I knew that Shalmi was altogether burnt where the Hindus lived, And even our Waris Road, which was a street so far away, had so many empty houses that had been looted and that I went through. And it was sad. I was young, but it registered. That partition registered. So I could write about it. It was very, very important for me to express what I had heard. And then there was the experience of one day I was going with my, I didn't go to school, so I was going to my private tuition just across the road a little way and holding my Mali's finger. And we saw a gunny sack opposite. And the Mali sort of kicked it, and a very handsome young man came out of it. He was just his torso and his hand up like that. He was lying, and there was a wound in his, as though it had been cleanly cut, like a V in his flesh. And he seemed to be handsome and sort of glowing even in death. There was something very strongly, and it made a very strong impression upon me. And he spilled out of the gunny sack. Now, when we were filming this scene, I'd written about it, and Deepa thought I must film it. After a while, she came and said, how did you find this man in the gunny sack? I brought big, big gunny sacks and I put Rahul Khanna, and he does not fit into them because Rahul Khanna was taking the part. And then to my mind, I suddenly realized that what I had seen, thinking the man was in a gunny sack, I realized his legs had been amputated. And that's why I saw him like that. So that I felt, I've just seen his torso and his face and his breast, And then, of course...
sorry, go on.
they managed to do something with Rahul Khanna and the big gunny sack.
Yeah, and you carried these memories with you for a long time before you came to actually writing the book, and you chose to write it from the perspective of a child.
I started writing the first book. I was at the most 10, 11 or 12, you know. And it was just an obsession with me. I couldn't stay away from it. Even when we were playing bridge, I would run away and write one or two sentences. Because, you know, it was in my mind and it was rushing. And I wanted to write it. And I enjoyed it so tremendously. It was something about the creative endeavor, which is like something sublime. You know, you have felt that, I'm sure. You know, you feel one with everything.
Nice way of putting it. Okay, can I ask you to move from the story of this amazing book, which was written so many years ago, made into film, published in different places, and which is still being translated. It's recently had an excellent run in France, and it's been nominated by the BBC as the 100 most influential books and so on. So I'm going to ask you to leave that behind and move on to a few general questions that I want to put to you. And one
Sure.
is that I read that you said somewhere that you're an ardent feminist, but you don't like to preach feminism, and that you were greatly influenced at one time by the books of Betty Friedan, Germaine Greer, and others. What do you feel today about feminism and where it's at in the world? And do you still, I hope you do still see yourself as an ardent feminist?
Oh, yes, of course. Feminism is very dear to me, and it informs my life in a way. And I resent anything that happens. Like there's a horrible thing in Pakistan that happens. Twice it has happened. A poor sweeper woman has been harassed and put into jail, and just because she's poor and she's a sweeper woman. And I have fought for her, had, there have been parts of processions I've entered into, but the government was very adamant.
That's your phone.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah.
So you were talking about the sweeper woman in Pakistan and how you sort of participated in processions in Pakistan.
Yes, very much so. Yes, and it of course hurt me. Every woman who was brutalized made me feel very sort of deeply affected me, and I wished I could do something about it, but there was not much I could do really. Although, you know, I'd given the Sitara Imtiaz, which meant I was given it to, it's by the Prime Minister. And I could have not easily approached those people about this issue. They would not tolerate it, you know.
But you have written very strong women characters in your work, and that is a writer's way of also addressing the commitment to feminism, right?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. When I write, even the Ice Candy Man is a very feminist story of what happens to helpless young people and how men bully them. And part of the reason that Ice Candy Man became such a runaway success in Paris is this very aspect of the way women can be bullied by men.
Okay, Bapsi, then let me move on to another question. It's a two-edged question, actually. So, you've also written about the cities which you've loved and lived in. So, Mumbai, Lahore, Karachi, Houston, and so on. And you've got this wonderful book on edited volume on Lahore. And you said at some point that you have lived at the borders of some cultures and steeped in others. I don't know if you remember saying this, that as a writer who belongs to the world and who has traversed many countries and lived in many and written about those, and now you're settled in the States, you've said that you've kind of, been at the edge of some cultures and been steeped in others. What did you mean, if you remember making this statement? What are the cultures you're steeped in? Or if that is too difficult a question to think on right now, would you like to say something about the cities you've loved? Because that too is very much part of your writing.
Yes, yes. I mean, I've loved Lahore. Then I've loved Karachi. And I have absolutely loved Bombay. Bombay became just it opened my eyes in so many ways. When I got married, my husband said, "What are you? You don't know how to talk. You don't know how to walk. What are you?" And that was true. I didn't know how to converse. Of course, I walked very, very, afterwards he would say, "Oh my God, you're very sexy." He didn't, I don't know if he loved me or what, he just, I was his wife and that was that, And his mother was the person who looked after me, or who was the person. Because he would just go off in the morning, come in the evening, take me off to the movies, give me a quick dinner, and then drop me off at my cousin's in at the Oval. They had they lived in one of the tall buildings there. And I spent a lot of time at my cousin's. And one of the cousins there, she was much older than me, but she had taken a class at Dior in France. And she made me the most beautiful outfits. And I had at that time absolutely stunning figure. And I would wear them and everybody would, I would go into a bank and people would just pass a word to each other and everybody would look up, And it was a flattering experience after living in Lahore like a little unknown, unliving identity, to suddenly be somebody flattered and, people looked at, So I did enjoy Bombay tremendously. It gave me a sense of freedom. I could get into a bus and go to Chor Bazaar and go to all sorts of places by myself and experience the city. And I felt really in love with Bombay. Then, of course, there is Houston. In between, I lived in Atlanta also for a while. Atlanta is a beautiful city, gorgeous city, and the university on top of it, I loved it. I taught there for a while. But it has no energy, just no energy, strange. And then my husband moved to Houston and I moved to Houston. And Houston is an ugly city, but it has energy. Anything you touch flowers out there. Anything you touch happens out there. And I was happy to be in Houston thereafter.
Okay, so Bapsi, we have just a few minutes left, and I have several more questions, but I shan't be putting them to you because there are a lot of questions from the audience. So one of the questions that the audience is asking, which I would have asked you also, is really about what it was. You are one of the writers who has worked very closely with the filmmaker on turning her book into a film. And if you would like to talk a little bit about what that experience was like, what it was it like to rethink your work, which grew organically in one form into another form, and what was lost and what was gained. Did you enjoy that?
I was on the set for a long time. I enjoyed being with the actors and actresses. I adopted Rahul Khanna as my son. And of course, it was a treat to talk to Amar Khan, who didn't talk much. But oh my gosh, he was so popular. Every time I would enter that enter that space, that garden where the film was being shot, people would fall at my feet outside and say, please, please, let us have a little darshan of Amar Khan. We want to touch him. We want to see him. We will touch your feet if you do this for us. I was amazed at how popular he was. There was a railway bridge on top of where we were filming. And that bridge got full of people looking for Amar Khan. And they were just stuck there because they thought they saw glimpses of Amar Khan. And of course, he is a little shy. I mean, Rahul Khanna was very easy to talk to. Nandita Das, Deepa Mehta, they were all easy to talk to. But Amar Khan was shy and not so easy to approach. But he became good friends with Nandita Das. And one of the very striking things that happened there, and no, I don't think that's a very long story.
Very long story. Okay, so we'll leave it for now. There was another question that Namita had asked me to, that she was interested in. You describe yourself as Punjabi, Parsi, Pakistani, right? The 3 Ps. And what do you think? Do you have any view on how Parsis are writing these days?
Yes, there are a lot of Parsi writers who have come up. And I can't think of anyone who is writing excellently, but there are promising little books of short stories mainly, and not very sustained work yet. Another Parsi writer has yet to come, and I'm sure it will come. Have you any in mind?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of writers like Rohinton Mistry, Adil Jasawala, Keki Darwala, so many others. So in the list of Parsi writers now, you get to see many names. But there are issues, and Meher Pestonji also, Boman Irani also. But they're writing about different things. It's a range of issues. So I don't know if one can characterize that writing as Parsi writing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, each has their own style and their own contribution to make, but nothing earth-shaking so far.
Okay. So on that note, Bapsi, let's turn to the audience questions. There are a number of questions, and we have about 15 minutes. So I'll go one at a time. Would that be easiest for you?
Sure, of course.
Okay. So the first question is, how is your experience with your books taking shape in the movie world? We've already talked about this.
Yeah.
I think that we need to go there. Then there is, how do you think your childhood experiences of partition have had an impact on your life today? Now, you talked about it a bit, but if you'd like to elaborate on it a bit.
They have had a very strong impact upon me because I saw the mayhem, and that was caused when the actual partition took place. The killings and the division of the land was done so haphazardly, without thought of how the line was being cut, cutting villages in half. And, it was a cruel, cruel way to cut. And it gave me a sense of the cruelty of the British at that time, that to them, we were nothing, we did not matter. They just sat and he drew a line, not thinking where and what. There were people beneath that line. And then, of course, there was West Pakistan and East Pakistan. And it became a very odd thing. How can the two exist? And though the Pakistanis wanted it to be one and they wanted it to have the same prime minister, but eventually they got separation, which was just natural. It was unnatural to have Pakistan separated by thousands of miles of India. But the thing that rankles all the time is the question of Kashmir. They're the poorest people, the mildest people, and to see them crushed and harassed, it is a thorn in my side and it makes my heart bleed all the time. There's nothing I can do about it. Nothing anybody can do about it. Soldiers are apparently killing all the men, brutalizing the women, raping them, and they don't have any feeling for them as human beings.
I was also thinking, Bapsi, when we were talking about the session today, I was reminded of the time that you and I had met, and that was in Lahore at one of the literature festivals. And even that kind of interaction is now no longer possible. So in a sense, the partition's impact on the lives of writers and is also something fairly major. I don't know if you would want to travel to India, whether your passport, even if American, would allow you to come here anymore because of your Pakistani origin. So
I have traveled to India several times because one of the big tragedies of my life was that my son was left behind in India. And that was a period of long agony when I couldn't be with him when he was a child. A mother's heart cannot tolerate that. And I would have horrible thoughts that God knows, how he's being treated, how he's being maltreated. And we had some people living, Parsis living there, living in Lahore, who traveled to India, and they came back and they said, oh, we were living in a house right across Naomi's house. Naomi was his stepmother. My husband had married again. And she was beating him. And oh my God, it was also a war had broken out. And I ran to the to the Pindi embassy and said, let me get across. My child is being harassed. What is happening? And when I did eventually manage to go, and my child was 10 years old, I asked him, how are you? How are you? I found out he was a happy-go-lucky, happy child. He was not being harassed. He was being brought up very nicely. And he was an affectionate child. And then I saw him at 10. And then again, there were wars and impossible to travel. And my heart kept on yearning for him. A child which is separated from you when he's a child, the child is still attached to the woman's womb in a way. And a part of yourself is missing. And it was not till I met him, and then met him in Bombay when he was 16. And then I hugged him. I said, oh, Mom, that's not the way to hug. And he gave me a big chappi. And he said, that's how you hug. And I felt this boy is okay. He's fine. He's well brought up. He's well balanced. It gave me a sense of great relief. And of course, he knew I was in love with him. There's no doubt. All mothers are in love with their children.
Yeah, and this is what partition did to people's lives, really.
Yeah.
So
This partition entirely.
there's another question, a lovely question, which asks you about your time being confined to the home as a child and the loneliness that you spoke of, and how today this is happening under the lockdown to young people who are also now, everybody, but young people particularly, deprived of social contact. So the person, Zoya, asks, are there any suggestions that you can give to people to be able to cope with possibly a very lonely life? How to stay positive and strong in this time?
I mean, nowadays the children have much more outlet because of the internet, and they can go to various sites, they can go to various associations. But my idea would always be read books. There's nothing to compare with them. They can drag you into them. Books, I found, opened out different worlds to you. Otherwise, yeah, you can learn from every source, but you may not learn necessarily good things. The movies and the videos can attract young people to something not very savory. And books can be selected and selectively given to children in schools. And it does open windows in them, and it does mold their personalities in a better way. Family life, of course, matters, but books, to me, have mattered a great deal.
Okay, Bapsi, and we have another question, which is a question that you have often answered, but it's a really interesting story. Why was the title of Ice Candy Man changed to Cracking India?
That's very, very simple. When the book was to be published in America, the publisher said, Ice Candy Man in America means someone who peddles drugs. And there are already too many books on drugs, and nobody will want to read another book on drugs. So instead of that, we will call this Cracking India. We should also say something about the book. And it's like India is a closed identity, and cracking it like a nut will open out and reveal it. That was the feeling behind it she had. And I agreed. I thought it was a good idea. So India became Cracking. So Ice Candy Man became Cracking India. Although the title Ice Candy Man is much more I think, catchy.
Also, you said, I think somewhere in Cracking India, there is this conversation about how can a country be broken?
Yeah.
The word used is broken, and then it's used in connection with what about that house down the road? If you were to, can you actually divide that into two? Can you break it into two? And then Aya, I think, comes back and says they'll have to have a large canal or something like that to divide or break the country. So it resonates with that as well.
Yes, you can't break a country. This is what the division was doing. It was not only breaking the country, partition was shattering the country. Inch by inch. Inch by inch, it was shattering. Where the lines were drawn, they were definitely not going to be. They were not practical lines. I mean, in the Punjab, the Sikhs had nothing. So they had to claim something there. And they did with great brutality. I mean, they were very brutal, unfortunately. And there were other means of claiming things like Gandhi had done. But mostly people resorted to brutality and harsh measures to take what was not theirs. They were taking parts of the country which were not allotted to them, things like that. That we have nothing, we'll have a Khalistan, we want a country.
So we have two questions related directly to Pakistan, asking you what you make of Pakistan as it stands today. Did you expect it to end up where it is? And what were your days in Pakistan like post-partition? But you've already spoken of that. So maybe just the first part of the question. There are two people who asked them. So the first part, which is what you make of Pakistan as it is today.
Well, I've lived in it so long that I don't think about it. It is, in a way, my home also, although my home now is in America. But I go to my house there, and I built a new house out there also, which after that I demolished it and sold it. I sold it and the other people demolished it. So I have ties to Pakistan. I keep going. And it is there to stay. It is a prosperous, at least Lahore is a prosperous country. Karachi is a prosperous country. And town by town, if you look at it, it's settled down.
So, Bapsi, thank you. There are a couple of other questions, but we've run out of time. So, I think on that note, saying Lahore is a prosperous country and Karachi is a prosperous country and they're your home and you love it, we are going to have to end this lovely conversation. Thank you so much for...
Urvashi. I wish we had hours and hours more to talk. I'd love to talk.
Yes, we'll do a Zoom call.
Okay. Let's do that later. How do you do a Zoom call?
Yes, we'll talk about that privately, separately.
Okay.
Now I think Sanjoy has something to say.
Thank you so much, Urvashi, and thank you, Bapsi. Bapsi, you are on a Zoom call even as we speak. This recording is on something called Zoom, so you can just connect with whoever you wish to and actually see them in this time of lockdown, which you wouldn't otherwise do.
Okay.
But you can also ignore anybody who you don't wish to see, and you can just switch off your camera and say, I'm not here, go away. So you have many possibilities, but that was such a wonderful conversation. And thank you for saying that about how important books are for young people and for children, and how it opens up their minds and their possibilities. And that truly
lives, yes, you're right. Their possibilities.
Thank you so much, Urvashi. That was beautiful and considered. Thank you all for watching and being such a wonderful audience. We'd like to thank our partners in Houston, Imprint, which is a wonderful home for writers, and they do a lot of work as well. Our partners, in fact, for JLF at Houston. Thank you, Urvashi and Zuban Books. And please do remember to log in on Saturday, the 1st of August, for another set of great sessions. The first one is on the power of big tech and surveillance capitalism. Carl Miller in conversation with Mihir Sharma. Multinational corporations are being shut overnight with a single tweet. Facebook's value has grown bigger than many countries. Robots are battling for elections. Coders and hackers are writing policies, and algorithms are shaping our lives in more than unimaginable ways. Carl Miller's Transmission Prize-winning The Death of the Gods reveals the fascinating and often hidden characters of the digital realm that are changing the world. This is at 7 p.m. Indian Standard Time, 2:30 p.m. British Summer Time, and 9:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And the second session on Saturday, the 1st of July, is Aladdin and the Other Marvelous Tales. Writer and translator Paulo Limos Horta has written on the cultural and literary history of the Arabian Nights and of the travelers, translators, and storytellers who gave the world these unforgettable tales in his marvelous Thieves, Secret Authors of the Arabian Nights, and Aladdin, a new translation. In Aladdin, Horta takes us on a dazzling journey, interweaving and reinventing the dark themes and enchanting whimsy of a classic that has transfixed us for ages. And this will be at 8:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time, 4 p.m. British Summer Time, and 11 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Stay safe. See you tomorrow.